Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year, and thank you for joining us on yet another episode of OPN's Dev Talk. I am, unfortunately, still your host, Steven Staniszewski, also going by Slave to Machine on Steam, so send all your death threats there. I'm flanked today by Chris Kellogg, VP or high-end muckety muck of OPN, and today we have a very confusing situation because we have two Chris's on the show today. We have I apologize profusely if I mess this up. Chris Natsuume, who is the co-founder and creative director of Boomzap Entertainment, and they have recently come out with a Kickstarter and a game on Steam Greenlight called Legends of Callasia. However, if you do a little bit of Google foo, you'll find out that Chris is not new to game designing. In fact, he's got a very, very wonderful credit in Far Cry, a game that I lost a lot of my life to. Thank you, Chris, for being on the show today.
Oh, no problem. Thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful. So you're coming to us from Japan currently, and you are running a virtual studio. Tell us what that is, because a lot of people, they're used to developers and designers all being in the same spot. You are running what's called a virtual studio. Tell us about that.
Well, so we didn't actually plan it like this.
Okay.
It's something that developed organically. When we started the studio, I'm one half of the founding team. The other half is my business partner, Alan Simonson, who's actually a Norwegian who lives in Singapore. So that's even more confusion. And we of course met in Scotland. And when we were working up there, we knew that we wanted to start a game company someday. And when we started Boomzap, I was actually living in Seattle. He was living in Singapore. And I had this great idea. It was right at the beginning of the sort of casual game movement. It was when, I guess, Bejeweled and those other games were just coming out about 10 years ago. And I said, great, let's start the studio. We'll move everyone up to Seattle and we'll start a game studio in Seattle. And he said, what are you crazy? Let's start it in Singapore. It's way better down here. And neither one of us wanted to move. So we said, all right, you stay in Singapore, I'll stay in Seattle, and we'll do it like that. I was sort of the creative design and business side of the studio. He was the technical side. So obviously we needed some artists. And the best artist that we knew was an animator in Kuala Lumpur. And we said, well, let's have him join us and he can come to one of those two places. And he was like, no, screw you, dudes. I'm staying in KL. So suddenly we were in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore and Seattle. And we said, all right, well, we'll make it work like that. And then we gained some more people in KL and some more people in some other places. And I guess once every 6 months or so, we would talk and we would say, all right, when are we going to actually, build this studio? And nobody ever wanted to move. And so we became 5 people and 10 people and 20 people. And at one point, I think we were up to about 95 people in about 14 countries. And so we had people in Ukraine and Russia and the Philippines and Indonesia and Thailand and all over. And we just never really found a need to put us all in a big room. So it kind of developed like that.
So essentially, you're just trying to slowly but surely take over the world by having a sleeper cell in each country.
Well, it did actually kind of work out a little bit like that, because the way it actually usually progresses is we'll find somebody who's really good in, say, Manila. And once we had someone really good in Manila, well, they know some good people and they know some friends. So it's like we kind of put out a tendril and it grows in that location. And then, we find somebody in Jakarta or we find somebody in Ho Chi Minh. And as we sort of spread out, those people know people and those people know people. And so it kind of grows like a mushroom grows in a forest, actually. But it's been really interesting, and we have a nice variety of people from different places. Whatever kind of person you might want to think about, we've got them in the studio somewhere, so that's kind of fun.
And I have a question. With all these folks from all over the place, do you ever run into any issues like language barriers or any difficulties communicating?
Well, I mean, obviously there are challenges. Most of the people come from places where English is a primary language. So obviously in Malaysia or Singapore or the Philippines, these are places where English is a very natural language for people to speak on top of whatever local language they speak as well. And we do hire for that. So if somebody can't communicate with us in English, it's not somebody who can work with us. We have some more challenges in places like Ukraine and Russia and Indonesia, where the English skills tend to not be as strong. But again, it's on a person by person basis. So we kind of hire for the people in those regions who can work in English. I think one of the things that it does force us to do is we don't spend a lot of time on Skype or verbal communication. We spend most of our time on chat. And I think most people end up communicating quite well in English in chat because, you know, if they get confused, they can go Google it, or, you know, they can have the time to read it. Obviously, I speak a little bit fast. So if I'm talking to somebody on the phone, they're going to miss a lot of what I'm saying. But if I'm chatting it out, they've got the time to read it and sort it out. So the studio runs largely on a program called HipChat. I think all the cool kids these days use Slack, but we started using HipChat before Slack was a thing, and we never saw a reason to change. And we're quite happy with it. But that's sort of our being in the office, is being logged into HipChat and being available in HipChat. And that's kind of where everyone communicates. And since it's a chat-based communication, the English hasn't been as big an issue.
And so logistically, I would imagine there's a lot of issues to deal with, especially if you have the entire team scattered to the four winds. I would imagine, you know, bad weather would be an issue. Internet connectivity, is that ever a major issue? Something tells me that's a yes.
Oh, yeah. If you're, the thing is, it's not just that we're working all over. We're working predominantly in Pacific Rim Asia. And so you're looking at countries like Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia. These are not countries known for their incredible infrastructure, right? Every time there's a hard rain in Manila, we have issues. You know, I would say on any given day, and right now the studio is about
same for us, by the way.
On any given day, at least one person doesn't have power. That's just a given.
Wow.
And so we just kind of fight our way through it. It's cost of doing business in the developing world. But on the other side of that, I'm really proud of the fact that we're doing business in the developing world. I mean, these are places that have, you know, great college graduates, great educated people who want to be involved in development, but places where the options for being in a dev studio are quite limited. And because we're a virtual studio, you know, we don't just have to be in Manila and Jakarta, right? We've had people in Solo and Iloilo and Bandung and places you're going to have to go look on a map to find. And for those people, they sort of had the choice of, they could either pack all their stuff, move to Manila or move to Singapore or move to the big city and leave their families behind and leave their lives behind, or they could come work with us, stay right where they were, where the cost of living is a lot cheaper, where they're living close to their families, where they can be part of their responsibilities. This is a great thing for those people. And so while there are challenges and we have to fight them every day, I think the payoff is huge.
And so, to be honest with you, that's kind of, just to put a shameless plug in for our own selves, that's kind of what we do. I mean, for example, the other Chris is on the other side of the country. Me, I'm in the Pacific Northwest. Fred, I think, is calling us from a bunker in France somewhere. I don't know. We always see French Fred, but that's beside the point. Yeah, the thing is, why is this not used more by more developers? I mean, we have a lot of indie devs that we interview, and many of them say, you know, the bulk of them are in the same zip code or the same area, and yet other people are across the country. Why is it in 2016 now? Why is it that not too many companies are doing something similar if it is such a good option?
Well, I think for a lot of indie studios, you have to look at how they develop. I mean, a lot of these studios are me and my friends. And for me and my friends, it's likely they probably live in the same zip code or somewhere close, and they probably like to go out for beer and hang out. And I mean, let's face it, indie development, any kind of development, is a very social activity. And we feel it in our studio sometimes. We feel that lack of socialization. I don't feel really challenged in our ability to produce games or produce creative output. But what we do see sometimes is our staff gets lonely. You know, they miss that opportunity to hang out with the people that they work with all day or go out for a beer. So we actually do meetups every now and then. So I'll fly down to Manila or down to Kuala Lumpur, and we'll, you know, usually in Manila where it's nice and cheap, we'll, you know, rent a whole restaurant and fill it with people and get real drunk. And we don't actually get a lot of work done at these events, but it's nice every now and then to, you know, look at the people who you're working with in the face and have a beer with them and talk to them. And I think that part gets missed out in a virtual studio a little bit. And it's important that Alan and I, you know, go down and meet with the team. And when we do that, we we ship people in from different places. So when I go to Manila, I'll bring some people from KL over, or bring some people from Jakarta over, and they always have I think they're a lot more excited to see each other than they are to see me. But it's certainly something that kind of adds that social aspect to what we're doing.
It could just be the booze as well. I mean, there's that.
Yeah, the alcohol helps. Absolutely.
And one thing that is kind of remarkable about your studio is that at least from a 2014 article that I found, it mentioned that you were a 50-50 split between men and women, which I'm sure is maybe a rough number, but still anywhere over 25% is an amazing accomplishment for any game studio or any software company. And so I wondered if that was something that just kind of happened naturally, or is that actually by design? Did you actually seek out women for certain roles in your company?
Well, I think the idea that I'm going to Southeast Asia and seeking out women's a little creepy, but no,
Wouldn't imply that.
Yeah, what actually happened is it just happened organically, and I think it goes back to the way in which we hire, which is, we'll find somebody, and that person knows some people, and that person knows some people. We were lucky enough early on in the development of the studio to bring some incredible women. There's a studio artist named Karen in Manila. Early on, we had a designer named Luna, both in the Philippines. And these people, obviously, because they're women, tend to have more women friends and women associates. And so they knew other women, and they brought those women in to apply at the studio. There's a lot of nepotism that goes into any hiring in any game studio. Anyone who tells you different, I mean, it's always better to hire somebody who knows somebody that because then that person doesn't suck. And so once you start having some women in the studio, the odds that you're going to bring more women into that studio are simply higher. And I think that's part of the reason. I think the other reason is, as a virtual studio, we kind of everything is based on your results. It's based on what you can produce. And I think in that environment, you end up having people who better represent a cross section of humanity, right? I think when you have a brick and mortar studio, there's more of that sort of good old boy network of, I want to be in a room full of people that look like me or sound like me. When we talk about diversity, I mean, obviously we have a lot of women in the studio. We also have a lot of religions in the studio. We have Muslims working in the studio, and Buddhists and Christians and whatnot. Hasn't been an issue. We've had transgendered individuals working in the studio. We've had gay people working in the studio. And none of this has been an issue for us. It wasn't anything we planned. But I think when you pull everything else out and you say, I'm only going to judge you by the content of your work, then suddenly your studio looks very diverse, because a diverse group of people can produce good results.
That's fair enough. So we've talked a little bit about. Oh, sorry, Chris. Chris is, yeah. So we've talked a little bit about the past. Let's kind of get to the closer to the present. You are not a neophyte. We deal with a lot of indie developers. You've been in the industry for a long time. In fact, like I mentioned at the top of the show, you have a producer credit on Far Cry, which I think is probably a big deal. I mean, I occasionally hear about it. I think there was a movie made by Uwe Boll. It won Oscars, and I'm just curious. How does one?
That I'm certain of.
Well, I think actually Uwe gave himself the Oscar after he's done punching critics out. So there's that. But how do you go from Crytek, not to discount that, how do you go from Crytek to Big Fish Games?
I worked at Crytek, and to be clear, my career goes way beyond that. My first game shipped on, floppy disks back in, I think, 92, something like that.
What game was that?
92, 93.
It was the Fortress of Dr. Radiaki. It was back in the era of Doom clones. It was one of those like 2.5D maze-like Doom-alikes. It was a little indie game that I put together with some. I got into games actually because I used to live in Austin. I went to college down there, and I happened to be in a D&D role-playing group with a bunch of guys who used to work at Ultima. And they were actually some of the core team from the original Wing Commander series. And so they broke off to go start their own game studio. And when they did, I just happened to be their dungeon master in their D&D group. And so they brought me in to make games with them. So that it goes all the way back to there.
That's awesome.
But, speaking of Crytek, I'm really proud of working on Far Cry. I'm really proud of that experience. it was a really hard development process. That was like 9 months of really brutal crunch. And my daughter was born right in the middle of it. And somewhere, I guess it was in February of that very bitter crunch process, I just said, I don't want to do this again. And I actually was ready to leave the game industry. And so I actually stepped away. I left Crytek. I went back to Seattle, in fact, and went to business school. I went to the UW business school to go get my MBA. And in my mind, I had this idea that I was going to get out of games and go work as a producer at Google or something like that. And while I was there, I actually went to a lecture from a guy named James Gwertzman, who had started a little studio called Sprout. If you guys remember a game called Feeding Frenzy, he did that game. And he had sold Sprout to PopCap. And he gave a little lecture about having started this little tiny casual game studio and building that up and selling it to PopCap. And I walked out of that lecture and I was like, that's what I should do. Because, I think one of the big challenges when you talk about starting a studio, especially if you come from the older generation like me, there's that belief that you're going to go make console games and you're going to make some big AAA thing. And to do that, there used to be sort of a path. You're gonna go build a demo and you're gonna find funding with your demo and you're gonna find a publisher and it's all big money. I mean, it doesn't sound like big money now, but I think when we did Far Cry, I think that was about 8 million euro, something like that. I mean, that's real money. It's certainly I'm sure the Far Cries that they're making now are in the hundreds of millions, but back then 8 million euro sounded like a lot of cash. And so I had always thought that was the path. And James kind of broke down a path where you could bootstrap up your own studio. You could invest in your own development and build your own games. And through the distribution networks that existed then, which were obviously Big Fish Games and Real Networks and Gamehouse, and there was that sort of explosion of casual content then. And I said, well, we should do that. We could do that without any investment. We can do that without bringing big money guys in. So I called up Alan and I said, this is what we should do. And we made a terrible little game called Jelly Boom. It's absolutely awful. But it was our first sort of homemade game. And we put it out on Big Fish because back then Big Fish would put pretty much anything up that you wanted to put on their site. And I think total we've made about $100 off of that game. But it proved to us that we could do this thing. And so we made a couple more terrible games and our games gradually got better. But the beautiful thing was we started a studio with absolutely no investment. We've never had investment, and we've run it we're deep in the year 10 now. And, in many of these years, we've seen, well over $1 million worth of profit. So not profits, excuse me, revenue. So this is a doable thing in this day and age in a way that it wasn't doable, say in 93 or 94. It was a very different world back then.
And the only reason I mentioned Far Cry is because I think the majority of our audience were zygotes back then when actual floppy disks existed and when the plastic ones came in. And God, Real Networks, I remember buffering for hours just to see something.
Just to play
when you think of Big Fish games, and I know that Big Fish doesn't technically exist anymore, they were purchased weirdly. They were always kind of, if you ever thought of a hidden object puzzle game, odds are pretty good that you're going to find it on Big Fish games. There are some people that are not big fans of those. My question is, how do you feel about the hidden object puzzle as a genre? It's not one that you see too often unless you are looking in a little niche, kind of like Big Fish games.
Well, let me answer that question in sort of a bigger framework.
Sure.
I think what we've seen recently, and by recently I mean in the last 5 to 8 years, games have changed. When I started making games, a gamer was a 12-year-old kid with a console that liked to see some boobies and some blood, and that was games, right? And it was very straightforward.
Nothing has changed.
Well,
some things have changed.
Those still exist, right? But what we've seen is other people have come into this industry too. So we made a lot of these hidden object games. I think we made 20 or 30 of them. I forget how many we made. We made a lot. And they were fun to make, but they were a very different experience and they were made for a very different audience. If I take that same 12-year-old kid that wants to if I take the Far Cry audience, right, who really wanted to see physics and blood and vehicle gameplay and long-range gameplay and all that fun stuff, and I say, okay, here you're going to sit down to a game that A, You can't lose. There is no lose condition to a hidden object game, right? That you can't really mess up. That is never going to stress you out. That's never going to be hard. That every single step of the process is going to be given to you in as subtle a way as possible so that you don't know that you're being fed every answer, but you're actually being fed every answer. And really, you're going to walk through this little story and look at some pretty pictures. Obviously, that audience is disgusted. That audience says, that's not a game. That's not what I got into this for. But I mean, I don't go to the movies and watch Star Wars and then walk out and go to the next theater and yell at the guys who are watching a romantic comedy and say, fuck you, romantic comedies suck. You should watch Star Wars. Right? I mean, what we've seen is games have expanded to a much larger audience, and there are going to be different niches, and those different niches are going to have different desires and needs, and we're going to respond to those. And I actually think that making hidden object games was a lot of fun, and I thought it was, our core audience for these games was over 60 years old and female. And if you had told me back in 1993 that I was going to be making games for my grandmother, I would not have believed that. But we did, and she loved them. And why is that not a good thing? That's the bit that I don't get, is why can't gamers just say, all right, well, that's for 60-year-old women, and I'm not going to play that. Let them have fun. It's not like they stopped making Grand Theft Autos. You can still go buy that, right? But now there's this other thing that somebody else can play, and I don't know why we would want to take that away from them.
Well, then, my question then is, when you were dreaming up Legends of Callasia, obviously that's not a find the object game, and it is more complex, but not extremely complex. I wouldn't say it's not. It doesn't have the depth of Planetary Annihilation when it comes to RTS or something like that, and I know it's not intending to. And so I wonder then, when you thought about building Legends of Callasia, what audience were you building that for?
Well, I mean, to be blunt, I built it for me. We spent a long.
And the people that play Risk.
Here's the thing. If I go back and look at what games got me into gaming, right? When back in the days when I was a dungeon master in Austin, I was playing a lot of Civilization, and I had a group of people I used to go play diplomacy with. I used to play diplomacy at tournaments. I'm that big a nerd, right?
It's awesome.
And I've been spending a lot of time making these hidden object games. It was fun. It was profitable. It was interesting. But at some point in your career, somewhere around year 20, you kind of stop and say, maybe I ought to make something that I want to play. I mean, to be quite frank, I don't even play first-person shooters, right? As the producer of Far Cry, I don't enjoy first-person shooters. So for me, to make a first-person shooter was just as much of a challenge as it was for me to make a hidden object game. Both of those games were games for an audience that wasn't me. And so at some point, we said, you know what? There's this sort of new world where there are all of these different niches, and you can make a product for a very specific niche. Why don't we make one for us? Alan is actually, my business partner, Alan, is also a huge strategy gamer. He's actually put hundreds of hours into Crusader Kings. I've put way too many hours into that myself. And so we actually started Callasia years ago, and it originally, believe it or not, started as a trading simulation. I love trading simulations. I play a lot of patrician, and there's a great game called Aviator made by a local Singapore studio that I played a lot of. And I thought it'd be really fun to make a trading game. And so we actually built this whole trading sim that sucked. It just wasn't any fun. We played it, we tried to get it to work, and we just didn't enjoy it. And somewhere along the way, I just stopped production on that, and I said to the team, look, this is not working, but we have all these tools to make a strategy game. Why don't we make something more straightforward? So instead of this sort of Byzantine trading thing, what do we like? We like fantasy. Let's do it in fantasy setting, right? And you know what? This trading game sucks because we don't get to fight. So let's allow people to fight. And so I actually told the team, go away for a week, come back to me at the end of the week with a design for what would be a good, straightforward strategy game using the tools that we have that's in a fantasy setting that allows me to fight with heroes. And as it turns out, the development team had some people on it like Adrian who were really into Heroes of Might and Magic. And they wanted to build something that kind of felt a little bit like Heroes of Might and Magic, but felt a little bit like I don't want to say Risk, because there's a whole genre of Risk-like games that involve a territory taking over another territory with armies and expanding that out. One of the best in the genre of the Risk-alikes is a game called Lux that I play a lot of, and I think a lot of.
Yeah.
And I wanted to build something that touched that same nerve, but did something really, really different. And they came back to me with a design that was pretty cool. But then we got to talking about, wouldn't it be fun if it was multiplayer? Because we wanted something different. We wanted something that people weren't doing a lot of. And we love multiplayer games. And obviously the problem with multiplayer in a strategy game, if you've ever played multiplayer Civilization or something like that, is the hot seat takes forever, right? I'm going to take my turn and move all of my little stuff, and then I'm going to go make breakfast while you take your turn, and then I'm going to come back, and it takes forever. Yeah. And I'm an old dude. I'm 40 some odd years old, and I don't have time for that. I got kids. I got stuff to do. I got like 2 hours, maybe 3 hours tops that I can play a game. And so I wanted to make a strategy game that could fit into those 3 hours that could be multiplayer. And the obvious sort of answer to that is to say, well, let's have it be a real-time sim. Let's go the way of, say, StarCraft or Warcraft or something like that. But the problem with those kind of games is they become about who can click faster, right? And again, I'm an old dude. I got sad old man hands. I can't click that fast. In a game of StarCraft, I'm gonna lose to some,
Korean 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Say it. There you go.
It's true. It's true. The Korean 12-year-olds will destroy me, or a Filipino 18-year-old whacked out on speed, right? So these guys, I don't want to play with. I don't want to play that.
More intense example, but we'll take it.
Yeah, but so how do you solve that? And I actually went back to diplomacy, and I said, what was really fun about diplomacy was that dual nature of let's go away and talk about what we're going to do, and then let's come back and see what everyone did and see it all resolve at the same time. And so we built the whole game around that basic premise of let's let everyone take their turn at the same time, but let's not have that turn actually take effect until everyone presses the end turn button. And so we built just a very, very basic mock-up of this with very, very simple armies. And it was just hellish fun. And we said, this is cool. Let's build from this. So that was the sort of core of the game. And as we move forward, we started talking about how could we make this more interesting than just Risk? Because when we first started, it still felt very Risk-like. And the big problem that I have with a game like Risk is there's a point, and you played Risk, you know this, there's a point at which you know who's won the game. And you're like, all right, there's no point in this anymore. He's taken over Asia and Europe. I'm stuck in Australia. There's nothing I can do. The hell with this.
Yeah, there's no clutch whatsoever. Once somebody already takes the majority of the land masses, you're done. I mean, it's kind of like Monopoly. When somebody gets all these pieces, you're pretty much screwed. And so is there a possibility of that kind of thing happening, or is there really a situation in Callasia where even if you've been beaten back to like some crappy little archipelago, can you possibly come back from that?
Well, this was exactly the question. And so we looked at how we could make that happen. And this is where the cards came into it. And so if you watch the video, see down at the bottom, there's some cards, and you've got a hand of cards. And what we wanted those cards to be was those were the, aha, you think you've got me, but fuck you, I played this card, right? And it actually works beautifully. And so, like any game, if I'm totally dominating the game, if I've played a really good game, yeah, I can still win, right? It's not random. So there's a balance there. There has to be a balance between, did you play the game really well and methodically, and you thought about everything, and you put a good strategy together, and you hunted him down to the corner of the map? Well, yeah, you should probably win. But in the case where I've had a couple lucky things, and I've kind of virally expanded out over a bunch of terrain, and maybe I'm a little overextended, that's a chance where somebody who seems to be losing right now can throw down a couple of these cards. Look, I summon a bunch of wyverns, I kill your hero, I do this other thing, and bam, the game turns around. And we call those moments in game design, we call them the turn, right? And the turn is that moment at which you thought you were losing and suddenly you're not. And that's the most exciting moment in a game. Lately, in recent years, I've played a lot of Hearthstone, and this is what Hearthstone is built on, is the turn, right? You're playing, you're down, and you've got exactly the right cards, and then bam, 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 fuck you, I win. And that's the best feeling in the world, right? And
Yeah.
so you have to give the players in the game the tools to do that thing, but you have to balance that back against, did they come up with an intelligent plan for doing that? And so that's why we introduced the cards into the game, and it's been a huge success. That really changed the game.
Yeah, I can actually just a quick example. I was playing your beta earlier today, and the cards came in super handy. Like I had a card that gave me 15 archers during a battle that was not looking good, and just before I threw that card down and I took an island and I felt awesome. So yeah, it totally worked.
Yeah, and so another thing that we added a little bit later in the game was the concept of kingdoms. And it's surprising that we didn't have it in earlier, because it's a key element to Risk, right? It's the same sort of thing as saying you get extra 7 armies for taking over Asia in Risk. We put in the same concept of there's a kingdom, and the kingdom gives you extra victory points and extra gold. And suddenly the whole game changed, because now there was, it was exactly for the reason we wanted it. It's a short-term goal. Before that, when we were playing the game, it felt a little bit like, all right, I build up a bunch of armies and I go invade your territory and we fight. And there was sort of a short-term goal and a long-term goal, but there was no mid-term. When we put the kingdoms in, suddenly there was this concept of, okay, you took over this kingdom, you're getting these extra victory points. I need to go destroy that thing. And so I'm going to play this peasant revolt card, which is going to get rid of one of your territories, or I'm going to take over this one little territory at the edge of your kingdom. And suddenly there was this very tactical sort of mid-goal feel to the game. It was a real success, and it's surprising that it got added as late as it did. That, I think we put that in sometime in November, and it totally changed the game.
No, it's a great feature. I like it a lot, and the game in general. And I don't want to make too many comparisons to other games, because it definitely is its own original piece. But I play a lot of Settlers of Catan with my friends. And it has that bit of feel too, because it's obviously there's a little more combat involved, but the interaction between the cards and the game board is huge in Settlers of Catan, much like it is in your game as well. And I can definitely feel the similarity just in general to board games, which are obviously like really popular right now. I've all my friends who played video games, majority of the time when they were younger, are now playing tons of board games with all their friends, because they're all getting married and their kids now too. So board games are the big thing now. Yeah. I still play games on PC most of the time.
There's no surprise to that. Like I say, my biggest influences as a game designer have always been board games: Axis and Allies, and Risk, and Diplomacy, and Shogun. And I can remember when I was still in high school, many decades ago, we used to start on Friday night, and we would end on Sunday night, and we would barely sleep. And we would eat so many Funyuns and drink so much Mountain Dew.
I would have been great friends with you guys.
and it was huge fun. And what's interesting about Callasia for me is that it's playable on iPad. And this was when I started with this idea, that was one of the rules, was this better be playable on iPad. And the reason for that was really simple. I work all day at a computer, and I'm tired at the end of the day. And I don't want to sit at a computer and play a game. I want to go lay on my bed, or lay on the couch, or pretend to watch TV with my wife. And while I'm doing that, I want to have a game, right? And on an iPad, what they call strategy games, there's this goddamn free-to-play nonsense. And there's not a good strategy game on iPad that's not a free-to-play strategy game. And so I wanted it to be in that sort of context. But there was this amazing knock-on benefit that I didn't expect, which was 5 guys sitting in a room with their iPads is hellish fun. And when we go down to Manila and have our drinking parties, we end up just sitting around the hotel room playing Callasia and drinking beer. And it has that same feeling of a board game, but without all the nonsense of trying to figure out all the rules and, how many points the game figures all that out for me. And we get to just concentrate on the fun bit, which is fucking over our friends by, playing the right cards or whatever. And it really, the best of this game is 4 or 5 dudes sitting around a hotel room or sitting around their house, drinking beer, all of them with an iPad. And I had not expected that. You know, the reason I wanted it on iPad originally was a much more sort of antisocial. I want to go lay in my bed and play a game for an hour before I fall asleep, and I don't want it to be Hearthstone anymore. That was my original dream. But this wonderful sort of corollary came out of it, and I've begun to wonder if this is a genre. You don't really see a lot of people talk about that, but the idea that we could have a social game that pulls us all in a room together using our iPads, where we're talking and chatting and, you know, telling each other, "Ah, fuck you, I can't believe you did that to me," or whatever. All that stuff you do in board games, but without all of the, you know, hour-long setup of all of the little pieces and whatnot that comes with board games.
Arguing
So this
over
is
who has what score.
yeah, and so this is essentially, and this is something that I've been griping about because I'm a bitter, cynical old man, and this is basically the resurgence of the couch co-op. The only difference is you're not in front of a console, you're holding an iPad or you're on a laptop, and so there's a couple of questions, and I desperately want to get to the ones, the Q&As of people have been asking questions. People keep asking questions because while we've got him, we're not going to release him until we're done. So, you know, we're just going to threaten his life and all. But it's funny that you mentioned free to play because we've talked to a couple of devs, and there was one, I can't remember who, but one of them said that free to play was the future of game development. And so you also mentioned about how on the App Store, it is essentially a free to play bonanza. What are your thoughts about free to play being the future of development?
Well, I kind of think of free to play in its current existence as the future of game development in the same way that I think of Donald Trump as the future of the American presidency. I don't have a lot of love for it. And let me be fair. There are free to play games and there are free to play games. I think lumping everything into the same pile is a little bit unfair.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a fan of the Candy Crush style free to play. This whole idea. I mean, think about it from a game player's perspective. You're in a game, you're having a lot of fun. When was the last time you said to yourself, "I really wish this game would just stop right now and ask me to pay 25 cents"? As a game player, you would never think that.
It worked in the 80s. There are arcades, though. I mean,
yeah, but I mean, we hated that. Right?
And shareware. Don't forget about that.
No, he's right though.
All right, so let's take that comparison. Let's take the Pac-Man comparison. I'm playing Pac-Man, right? And I dropped 25 cents for my game of Pac-Man. Fine, that's 25 cents. I'm playing a game on my iPhone. I dropped $600 for this fucking iPhone, and now you're gonna nickel and dime me for an extra 15 minutes of Clash of Clans? Fuck you. That sucks, right? I mean, as a player, that's fucking annoying, right? Yeah. And people say, well, if you don't want that, you can watch ads. Again, I say to you, when was the last time you were playing a game and in the middle of a game you thought to yourself, "I really wish this would just stop and show me an ad for a fucking Chevy"? Right? Never. You've never thought that because you're not fucking insane, right? This whole thing is bullshit, right?
So what you're saying is you're not a big fan.
Well, but let's be fair. How did we get here, right?
Yeah.
This is not that. I mean, people talk to these greedy developers. We're not greedy. We're starving, right? There's an old adage in the business world about selling razor blades, right? And they say, if you give away the razor, you can sell the blades for more money, right? That was the original idea, right? Give them the razor for free, and then we make the money back on the blade. And this was actually the console model. If you go back and look at the PlayStation or the Xbox, they sold that console often at a loss or damn near a loss because they knew that they were going to make the money back on the games because they were charging $40 some odd for the games, right? Apple turned this whole model on its head and said, you know what? If we can convince a bunch of rubes to give away razor blades, we can charge whatever we want for the razor, right? Which is exactly what happened. We're going to charge this ginormous price of $600 some odd for this thing that you stick in your pocket, and then a bunch of people are just going to make free content for it. Better than free content that we're going to take a cut on if they charge any money for, right? And it's a great business model. You can't hold it against them. It's pretty smart. But from the developer's point of view, it creates a real issue. We started, back when I started in casual games, it was $19 for a game, and then it was $9 for a game, and then it was $3 for a game, and then it was 99 cents for a game. And we couldn't go any cheaper because Apple wouldn't let us go any cheaper. That was the minimum price you were allowed to put on the thing.
Right.
So we said, okay, we'll give it away for free. Great. And maybe we can fool you into giving us some money later. And then it gets even worse than that, because all of the user acquisition people get in and they say, okay, well, if you want all these free users, we can sell you users. So now instead of saying I'm going to pay $5 for this game, I'm saying I'm going to pay somebody else $5 to bring me a user, and then hopefully, maybe if I'm lucky, I can put enough pain onto this poor ignorant fellow that I can squeeze $10 out of him, because I know I'm not squeezing $5 out of all of them. And we have this whole vocabulary in free-to-play now of how do I get my whales. This is gambling vocabulary. This is the vocabulary that people use in slot machines. And so, no, I'm not in love with any of this. But it developed as a survival tactic for young independent developers trying to find some way to make money. That being said, I think is a model for free-to-play that is less abusive. I play a lot of Hearthstone. I enjoy Hearthstone. I don't feel ripped off by Hearthstone. I feel like I've gotten my money's worth out of that product. I have a very good friend, Matthew Hall. He was one of the developers of Crossy Road. And I think his model of free-to-play is actually a very solid model, right? And he was very clear when he made that game. When you buy one of these little critters, that critter doesn't give you any benefit. You can't buy a victory, right? If you buy the chicken or the beaver or whatever little critter is going to cross the road, it's just some fun stuff. You can't buy a victory. And in Hearthstone, it's kind of sort of the same way. The idea is you can't buy a victory. As it plays out, yeah, you can kind of buy a victory in Hearthstone.
Yeah.
But so we kind of stopped. We stopped last year and said, we're going to totally change the way we think about free-to-play. We had done a couple of the sort of Candy Crush style free-to-play games because publishers kind of pushed us into it, and that's what all the cool kids were doing. And we just realized we hated it. We've actually got a game coming out this month, a totally different game called Monster Roller, which is a very sort of free-to-play-ish game. It's a monster fighting game. It's a lot of fun. But we kind of put that same Crossy Road style free-to-play on it, where we say, look, you can play a free-to-play game. You can, buy some stuff in it. You can buy some extra time, but I'm never going to stop you from playing. I'm never going to say in the middle of your game, you can't play right now, right? You're always going to get to play. And I'm never going to give you something where you can buy this thing and immediately win a victory or win passage to something. I'm hoping that works, right?
Yeah.
But with Callasia, we thought again about the different niches, about the different audiences, and we said, you know what? Strategy gamers hate all of this shit. If you take a real strategy gamer and tell him that you can go buy an add-on pack which gives you a stronger unit, and that unit's going to allow you to win a game, that strategy gamer feels that his game has been ruined, right? And you could take it to its logical extreme, right? The StarCraft users, if the game is not perfectly bilaterally symmetrical, if everyone doesn't have exactly the, down to the pixel same odds, they pitch a fit. I think that's a little extreme, but the idea that a strategy gamer has a very different feeling about what he's willing to pay for from, some 35-year-old woman that loves Candy Crush and she doesn't mind throwing a couple more quarters at it. I think that's the industry that we live in today.
Or like $6,000 if the kid gets a hold of the iPad and starts slamming the buy button. Since that apparently is a thing still.
I think marketing free-to-play to children is fucking evil. And anyone who tells you differently lies.
That's yeah. I can totally respect that.
Dude, I have an 11-year-old daughter, and if I found out that my 11-year-old daughter had spent $200 on, collecting some shit in some free-to-play game, I would be pissed. As a parent, I would be really upset. And I'm hoping, this is my genuine hope, and maybe I'm naive, but I'm hoping with Callasia we can get back to a world where we say, look, I'm going to offer you this game at a fair price. Look, you're going to, and the monetization model for it is very straightforward, old world. We're going to give you a few levels, we'll let you play it. If you like it, you can buy the game at a fair price. We're setting it at about 20 bucks, right? And for that, you're going to get a whole campaign. You're going to get, all of the multiplayer you want to play. You're going to get, all of this good stuff. And then later on, if we decide that, people want more of the game, we'll produce some more game and sell that as downloadable content. But we'll make sure that that downloadable content does not give you an advantage in multiplayer, but it maybe gives you some more campaigns that you can play or some more characters that you can play against other people who've got the same content. That's a fair model to me. That sounds to me as a strategy gamer like something I would pay for. It's very similar to what Crusader Kings does. It's very similar to buying a copy of Civilization and then going and buying the Civilization add-on packs. And I think this is a very fair model, and I'm hopeful that there are still people out there that are willing to pay for this. But I'm actually very frightened that
so it's basically it's essentially free to start is what we're saying. Instead of pay to win, it's essentially free to start. And then as you go through, you kind of like for unlocks or even buying, to go with the card analogy, you're buying booster packs, essentially.
Well, I think yes and no. I mean,
okay.
Where I think Hearthstone goes wrong is they've created you can grind to get the booster pack or you can pay to get through the grind, right? And I think there is a certain user who likes that. And I think there's a great space for that. And I get back to the why do I not hate hidden object game players? Everyone gets to have their space. And if somebody likes that space and they want to play in that space and that's the way they want to play, that's fine. But I think for hardcore strategy gamers, telling that guy, you need to play this map 500 times to get a bunch of gems so that you can buy a booster pack, I don't think that user wants that. I don't think a strategy gamer is into that experience. I think he's much more into, hey, I played through all your maps. These campaigns were great. I'd love to play another campaign. Great, we've made one for you. It's $5. Buy it, right? and it's very straightforward. I think that user appreciates that experience. And I do appreciate that we live in a world now where there are different groups of users that want different things. And I think the Callasia user versus, two games in my own studio, the Callasia user versus the Monster Roller user is a very different user. And I think we market to them differently. I think we design the product a little bit differently.
Yeah, so to a point, there was an old board game that I remember, one of the old VCR board games when those were, a thing. It was by the name of Nightmare. I think it was Atmosphere down in Australia, but they would release the base game, and then if you wanted expansions or add-ons, you just buy a tape. You reuse or you use the tape in the card set that came with the tape. So instead of having to rebuy the whole thing again, you could just buy packs to add on, and then you have this one central game become this huge epic thing. Of course, it didn't quite work out that way because everybody stopped using VCRs. But still, so that's definitely an unusual way to approach it, I think.
And also, I have just a question for you about then moving forward, sort of what your business model is going to be, particularly because we've had a look at your Kickstarter, and I know you've got about 7 days to make up a large amount of money. But we've also seen that you've been greenlit on Steam, which is very positive news. And both Steven and I got a chance to play your beta, and it's very polished, and I would say is in a very great state. We play a lot of games that are even considered finished, and they're not as high quality, I would say. But if given the situation with your Kickstarter, if that doesn't work out, what is your plan for moving forward, and do you feel that you need that money to move forward?
We've always seen Kickstarter as a great way to get pre-sales. Let's face it, Kickstarter is a wash for most people. What Kickstarter exists largely for now is if you can dig up a license that people love, that they want to see a new game of, or if you're a famous game designer that everybody wants to see a new game from, then Kickstarter is going to fund your development. If you're not one of those two things, you're really going to struggle. Right. And we're neither of those things. Right. I mean, I've worked on some great games, but let's face it, I'm not famous. And, we don't have a license that we can pull out that's famous. And so I think our Kickstarter has reflected that. What we've always seen Kickstarter as is a way to get there's a theory, the theory of 1,000 users. I'm sure you've heard of it. The idea that if you can get 1,000 people that really care about your product, you can build a business out of that. And that's what we're desperately trying to do. We have the funding to finish this game if we don't make our Kickstarter. And we will. I mean, you can see the state that the game is in right now. It would be pretty ridiculous for us to say, oh, we didn't make our Kickstarter, the hell with this, scrap it.
Yeah, I mean, I assumed you would want to finish after this much work.
Well, yeah, and it's my baby, right? I mean, this is the game that I've always wanted to make. We're going to finish it, right? But it certainly would allow us to finish it better, to have a bunch of pre-sales. And that was the idea behind the Kickstarter, was let's see if we can generate those pre-sales. Let's see if we can generate an audience. Let's see if we can get people interested. Because I think, you know, and it's why the number is set so low. I mean, we're only asking for $25,000, right?
Yeah,
I promise
it seemed
you,
like a humble amount.
We spent way more than $25,000 on this game. I can assure you of that. But even in that world, we've actually really struggled to hit what I would think is a very moderate target. And I think, you know, we've had a lot of comments from people who say, wow, this is really surprising. 2 years ago, this game would have been greenlit or would have been kickstarted the minute. And it's been, you know, I'll be honest, it's been a little disappointing for us. I would have liked to have seen it gone better so far, but we still got 7 days. It could still go there. But what we do walk away from it with, no matter what, is there are right now a couple hundred people who have donated, who are interested in the title. And we'll certainly keep in touch with those folks, and we'll certainly, you know, make the game available to them and market directly to those folks. Greenlight has been a much more successful process for us. We were greenlit in, I think, about 2 weeks. We had well over 50% of the people who saw it said, absolutely, I would buy this thing, which on Steam is actually a very good ratio. So what we found is if we can get this game into somebody's hands, they love it. If they're the kind of person that love these kind of games. The question for us is, how do we get this game into those people's hands? And that's where things like Twitch and YouTube and Kickstarter and all this other stuff come into play. The marketing is very different now.
Now, there was a question, sorry. There was a question that was asked down in the chat a little earlier. Is there any possibility, because there is a multiplayer aspect, is there any possibility of that LAN aspect, where the old style of hook up a bunch of computers and go at it from there? Or is it just a matter of let's stick to the App Store and just have the LAN that way?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we've been very clear on from the very beginning is everybody should be able to play on every platform, and I should be able to play versus people on other platforms with our platform. So right now, today, you can sit down at a Mac, a PC, and an iPad, and those three people can play each other in the same game. And that's cool. We love that, right? But that does create some issues for things like trying to create a LAN version of that, right? How do I hook up it becomes very technologically difficult. We kind of believe at this point in time, most people have internet. So we're pretty confident. And again, our development teams, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore. Actually, Singapore doesn't count, but Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia. These are places that don't have great internet. Singapore does have great internet.
Yeah, they do. They're fantastic.
So we had to develop this game to deal with really shitty internet from the very time that we started, because that's our development environment. And so if you've got any kind of internet at all, this game plays pretty well. Trust me, we've got people playing on connections you would not believe in the Philippines, dropping in and out in the middle of the game and still being able to come back into the game and still be part of the game, even having been out for 2 minutes in the middle of the game. We've built all of this into the game because we've had to in our production environment. And it creates a very robust experience. So our feeling is if you've got any kind of internet at all, this game is totally playable. But it's also totally playable. And we're going to be doing an Android build that actually, we got that up and running last week. And because Alan is an enormous nerd, we're actually going to be doing a Linux build of this as well. So whatever platform you want to play this thing on, you'll be able to play it on that platform, and you'll be able to play it versus people on any other platform.
Wow, that's awesome.
Especially since Linux gaming just doesn't get much love at all. But that's going to make like 6 people in the team happy.
It's true.
Our feeling is that's 6 people who will actually talk about our game. and it's a little bit the same with Mac. I mean, let's face it, there really aren't a lot of people that port good games over to Mac. And so even though we see that Mac only represents about 10% of our audience on our other titles, that 10% is responsible for about half of the comments that we get on our titles, because those users are just really excited that you brought them a product. We're hoping that by bringing this to all the different platforms and making sure it's available on all the different platforms, and making sure, importantly, that you can play with people on other platforms, that it becomes something that people on those sort of more niche platforms will go out and do grassroots marketing for us. I mean, that's the real story of games right now that I think people miss in the whole indie world. And oh, anybody can make a game and pick up a copy of Game Maker Pro, and we're all developers now. Yeah, anyone can make a game. Selling one is real hard, and making money on one is a real challenge. And this marketing part of the business, it's huge. It's half of the business now. And if you'd like to hear another rant, that part of the business has been taken over by what I consider extremely unscrupulous people. These user acquisition companies, they're parasites, and there's hundreds of them, and they're making money hand over foot. They honestly shouldn't be making money. People talk about, oh, Clash of Clans made all this money, and all these companies made all this money. Most of that money got churned right back into user acquisition, and that it's wrong. It's wrong.
So just to explain to the people that might not actually understand what that even is. What exactly is a user acquisition company? Are they legitimately exist just to drive traffic, or what exactly do they do?
Well, they're advertising companies, right?
Yeah.
So if you're playing a game of Clash of Clans, right in the middle of Clash of Clans, an ad pops up for some other game, right? And it says, you can go play this other game right now. Well, that ad was paid for by the people who made that game, right? And when they first started selling those ads, they used to sell them, per view. So how many people viewed this ad? Well, we quickly found out that was worthless, and having a bunch of people view your ad didn't end up anything. So they said, all right, now we'll sell them per install. So every time I can verify that you watched an ad, whether it was on Facebook or whether it was on Google or whether it was in the middle of somebody else's game, wherever that is, if I can verify that user watched this ad and then installed this game, then you're going to pay me. And that payment, back in the day was 15 cents, 25 cents. It ain't anything like that now. In North America and Japan, that payment is like $4 or $5 a user, right? And so now you've got marketing budgets that are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And the big players, the Angry Birds and the Clash of Clans and those people, they are just pouring money into these holes to acquire more users. And this is the basis of free to play. There's an algorithm that you actually put down, and you say, this is my cost of user acquisition. This is how much I paid to get a user. This is the average cost of a user. If that is positive, keep pouring money into the hole. If that's negative, trash the product. And that's the industry right now. And it has destroyed so many developers. And it's a scam. I mean, it's flat out a scam. And so when you look at, people who are playing games and they're saying, oh, I give all my money to these greedy developers. No, you didn't. You gave all your money to Facebook and Google and 30 other intermediaries that are basically selling ads on Facebook and Google. This is industry now.
Yeah, you've certainly exposed the underbelly of this issue to me, and I think Stephen as well, in a way that we haven't quite heard before. We've talked to a number of developers, but we've never heard of anything quite this abusive when it comes to just paying for, basically paying for users. It seems a lot like people who pay for Amazon.com reviews and people who pay for Facebook clicks, not to name any names. And and it's really unfortunate. I do really appreciate you getting on the air, though, to talk to us about some of these issues. We've just come up to our time wall right about now. But we've had a really, really great time talking to you. You've had some experiences in the indie industry that I think no one else has really had, or very few people have had, especially because you're a decentralized office. The time you spent in AAA, now you're in indie, and you've just really seen both sides of the coin in the industry. We just love this kind of in-depth explanation that you've given us. We usually sum up each interview with a single question, and that's when we ask, if you had to pick a favorite game of yours of all time, preferably a PC game, but we'll accept other answers, what would that game be?
Wait, this is a game I've made or a game I've played?
A game that you've played. But if it's a game that you've made that also happens to be your favorite, that would count too.
Bias works fine.
It sounds like a shill, but it's not. Right now, the best game that I play, the game that I sit down at night and play when I just need to unwind and clear my head, is Legends of Callasia. This is the game I've always wanted to play.
That's awesome.
I think it's very, very rare that you get a chance to do this in your life, where you have, we had money that we saved up from other titles. I got a chance to sit down and make the game that I've always wanted to play, and to build it exactly the way I wanted to build it without having a publisher tell me that you need to do this and that. And to do it with a relatively large budget. I mean, this isn't some tiny little, pixel-based indie game. This had, real artists and real developers behind it. Mm-hmm. You just don't get a chance to do that very often in your life as a game developer. And so for me, this has been one of the high points of my whole career and my whole life in games. It's going to be really sad if it doesn't make any money, but at some point, I don't care. I got to make this game, and most people don't get to do that thing. So for that, I'm really thankful. I'd certainly be thankful if more people felt like this about it and more people were interested in it, and if we could get more people playing it. But regardless, this is honestly the most fun I've ever had in games.
That's absolutely wonderful. And you know what, to be honest with you, I appreciate the insight that someone can bring us about the seedy underbelly of marketing. Because to be honest with you, and to toot my own horn a little bit, I'm normally the one that spends a lot of time bitching and ranting on any of these episodes that we do and stuff that we do on Tuesdays where we talk about games we want to review. And I will spend a very long time, as anybody can tell you, ranting about the underhanded methods that are used to just market games to people. And it's nice to see that I'm not losing my mind. It is actually a thing. There should be 12-step programs for these kind of things. It is actually just straight gambling, essentially. Yeah. The same methods, right?
It's not, to be honest with you, it's not just games. It's the entire entertainment industry. Mm-hmm. And what has happened is, as we've decentralized the entertainment industry and allowed anyone who wants to make content to make content, content has become a commodity. And once content becomes a commodity, the money is in advertising. And, we can decry it and say it's wrong or underhanded or whatever, but it's also the reality that we live in. And I think you guys are in an incredible position. The people who are on Twitch, the people who are on YouTube, these are the places that you can really fight this. But I'll be honest with you, it's there too, right? If I had a nickel for every email that I've gotten from a YouTuber who said, if you pay me $100, I'll go give you a positive review on my YouTube channel. And these are people with very small followings. If you'd like to go to the people with the larger followings, they charge a lot more money. But if you don't think those are for sale, I have a bridge in Brooklyn I would like to sell you. That's all for sale. And when you find people like you guys who genuinely are doing interviews and stuff like this for free, that changes things. That gives us indies a chance. That gives people who don't have the money to go pay some famous YouTuber to pimp their stuff, that gives us a chance to speak directly to the users. And we really struggle to get that chance, to be quite honest with you.
Well, I don't need another bridge. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm surrounded by like 12 bridges, so I don't need more. But what I can say is this. Every month or so, logistically speaking, we do an event called Rise of the Indie, where we get a bunch of developers to sit around and basically scream at each other. And so I was just wondering if you've got the time in your busy schedule, if you would be willing to jump on one of those and rip some people apart. Because we have had instances in the past, like I said, that free-to-play thing, that was actually a quote from one of the other Rise of Indie roundtables, and I would just love to get you two locked in a room together via Twitch, and see how well that goes. But the truth is, it seems like you are in the minority, because everybody else seems to love this free-to-play thing because it's the easiest way to get it involved. but we always want to hear from every side, and so I would love to hear more about it.
Yeah, and we definitely.
I am not in a minority. Trust me. Go talk to a bunch of professional developers who've been in this industry for a while, and you will definitely hear that I am not a minority in hating free to play. But absolutely, I would love to come be involved in that. I love to spout out my opinion. I'd be happy to be involved in that.
Sounds great. Any last thoughts about Callasia?
Well, I think I've pimped it pretty hard.
Keep going. Come on.
The one big thing I would say is we have actually a new beta coming out, I think, late tomorrow, with all kinds of improvements, all kinds of new stuff. We've got a new level for people to play, a whole bunch of new cards. We actually got a lot of comments from the users that they felt that the heroes were a little bit too samey, so we actually created a bunch of new stuff and new abilities for the heroes. There's a bunch of new content. And to be quite honest, I just need a lot of people to play it and give me some more feedback and see how they feel about it. So, whether or not you want to buy the game, please come play it. Please give us some feedback. I'm in the multiplayer lobby most of the time. I play as Night World. So if you'd like a game with me, I'm happy to play a game. And if anybody would like to Twitch that, please feel free to do that as well.
Hey, there's nothing wrong. We love shameless self-promotion. That's why we exist, after all. And there's very few games where you're ever going to get a chance to beat the dev at their own game, legitimately at their own game. So I always support that. But Chris,
actually, one of our artists, Edwin, is the best player. So I think he plays as Oldwan. So if you see Oldwan on and you can beat him, that's the I can't beat him. He kicks my ass pretty regularly. So.
Awesome. So, very, very last question. It's going to be on Steam. Will there be hats? Will there be hats?
I'm afraid I don't know what that question means. I think
we
I'm
just
just
had a question down there.
Right there.
One of our writers wants to know if there will be fancy hats.
This is because in other games you can buy fancy hats for your character as a way of earning money, because they are free to play, but the hats are
I don't
extra.
understand it. Honestly, I don't get the thing
Here's what I will say. If you go in and put enough money into my Kickstarter, I will put whatever hat you want on some character in the game.
I want to wear a fedora.
I forget what the level is, but the Kickstarter level of make your own character. You go bid for that. Whatever hat you want, I will put that hat on a character.
Yes. Can't wait.
Oh my God! Oh, this. Do we have to end this? Are you sure?
I think so. I think we were supposed to end 45 minutes. We've got over about 20 minutes, but.
But anyway,
sorry,
Chris,
I don't mean to be the fun police. No.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, Chris, it's been wonderful. Again, to do the shameless plug, the game is Legends of Callasia. It's going to be on every platform, plus toasters, apparently. So make sure that you look into it. Go to the Kickstarter, download the demo. If you haven't done so already, throw them some money, for God's sake. They absolutely deserve it. Chris, Natsuume, thank you for joining us. Chris Kellogg.
Best of luck, man. Good luck.
I guess it's okay.
Thank you guys for giving us the time to talk about this. It's huge. The whole team has been watching this, and they're all over the moon happy with this. So thank you so much.
Good. We're so glad to hear that. And we'd love to get you back on the roundtable as well.
Let me know. I'm always here.
Awesome.
All right. So, Chris, I'm Steven, Slave to Machine for OP Noobs. Check us out, opnoobs.com. Check out Legends of Callasia. Why are you still here? Go do it right now. But from everybody at the team at OP Noobs, thank you, and have a good night. Or morning, wherever the heck you are.